Hello and welcome back to Technology Now, a weekly show from Hewlett Packard Enterprise, where we take what's happening in the world and explore how it's changing the way organizations are using technology. We're your hosts, Michael Bird
and Aubrey Lovell. And in this episode, we are looking at an area which impacts every business in the world, unstructured data. That is, how can we start to squeeze insight from the piles of text, audio, video, and every other type of data that doesn't fit into a neat table? We'll be exploring why this data is so hard to use, and we'll be asking what can be gained from analyzing it. Plus, we'll be asking if the effort is worth the insight.
Sounds great. So if you're the kind of person who needs to know why what's going on in the world matters to your organization, this podcast is for you. And if you haven't yet, make sure you subscribe on your podcast app of choice so you don't miss out. Right, Aubrey, let's get into it.
Let's do it.
Unstructured data is an increasing issue or an emerging opportunity depending on how you look at it. According to research from Statista, in 2024, we generated over 147 zettabytes, that's with a Z, of data globally. That's over 402 million terabytes every single day. My goodness, Aubrey, that's a lot of data. Now, increasingly, that information isn't just in nicely collated text form. It's speech from our call logs, it's video, it's information from over 200 billion IoT devices in the world. And we've cited that estimation in the show notes. It's voice requests we've made to our smart devices, of which there are over 8 million in circulation, according to research from Global Web Index.
Now, all of that disparate information is known as unstructured data. Left alone, it's a huge storage problem. But carefully analyzed, it can contain valuable insight to be compared against other traditional metrics such as sales figures, voting intent, or economic results. Sifting through it all, though, that's an issue. And it's one organizations are only now able to tackle.
That's right, Aubrey. And a short while ago, I had the chance to talk about this with Gokul Sathiacama, VP of Data Storage for AI at Hewlett Packard Enterprise. He heads up HP's work into unstructured data platforms. So Gokul, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for joining us. So first question, what exactly is unstructured data?
Well, if you look at many systems of 10, 15 years ago, you created a file system, and then behind the file system, you had an object storage solution. And today, we are looking at data that is in natural form, whether it's images or videos or text, that needs to be stored in natural form or converted into things like Parquet, JSON formats, and need to be stored in a very rudimentary, at a file level kind of way.
And so how does that differ to structured data? So structured data is what, sat in a database?
Yes, it is like a database. It's in columns and rows, typical structured format where you store information so that you can easily query that information and get data out of it. In unstructured, there's no form.
So it's photos, videos, blocks of text that you can't necessarily format in that sense.
Correct. And then you need to know what the name of the file is in order to retrieve it.
Right, okay.
In a database or a structured format, you can actually go to the column, you can do a query on a particular column or row and get access to that data itself.
Okay, so if I had a database full of weather data and I had a database full of photos of weather data. In the database full of weather data, I could say, now I want to know what the temperature was like on the Thursday, the 15th of August.
Yeah.
Or maybe I want to know what days it was sunny. Whereas if I've got photos of weather data, I can't necessarily do that because I just have the file names.
Correct, but you can create something like a semi-structured environment, right? So you have some context of the data, but it's stored in a natural form.
Right, okay. So that is, going back to my example, so you're essentially saying you're creating some additional metadata about those images.
Correct.
So you're saying, okay, this is an image, but maybe I'll add some notes to say this is an image of a sunny day.
And a dog sitting on a rock or on a stand-up paddleboard.
Right.
Whatever it is.
Now, so doing that at scale must be pretty tricky because a human going through every single photo and saying, oh, yeah, that's of a dog or that's of a...
Yes.
That's a lot of challenging. So is this sort of the crux of the issue? Like, this is where managing unstructured data becomes the challenge.
Exactly. I mean,
Right.
think about this. You have a camera and you're taking videos and photographs. And in your mind, you have to create a catalog of when that image or video was taken and who was in front of the camera and what context that video or image was taken.
Yeah, yeah.
And that's what that semi-structured environment is doing. Your brain is a semi-structured format, and then your camera is actually the data is stored.
Right, okay.
And so what we are trying to do at HPE is create context for the data, so when AI applications want to train from the data that they've collected or want to get inference or compare them with other data in a RAG format, that's when you need to provide that context.
So how do we provide that context?
Very good question. So typically you put it in something like a vector database, and that vector database enables you to create vector embeddings that creates those contexts for that data.
Right, so vector database. Can you just define what a vector database is, how it differs from a standard database?
Okay. So think
Sequential
of it,
database, I guess?
Yeah. So if you look at a structured database, you have a table with columns and rows. That's how you create the context. But if you want to do analysis of that data, you put it into a data warehousing solution. You
Right.
extract, transform, load to a data warehousing solution before you can do business intelligence.
Got it.
So what a vector database allows you to do is move unstructured data into a format that can be easily queried against.
But how does it do that? Because the data's,
It's magic.
you still have these pieces of unstructured data that you don't necessarily have any context around. So
Right.
what exactly is it doing?
There are programs that are being developed, for instance, for images that create that context for the data. So when you get an image, you can run it through this program, and then it can say, oh, it's an image of a dog sitting
Right,
on
okay.
a stand-up paddleboard, and then store that information in a database, then start querying it from there.
So let's take this into a real world scenario. What sorts of organizations are generating a lot of unstructured data? Because I mean, one would think that most organizations, I don't know, let's think like retail, they've got products on the shelves. Each product has a barcode, a serial number, maybe a supplier name. But I can't think of many, off the top of my head, many examples of organizations that would be creating unstructured data. I'm sure I'm wrong. So
Everybody's creating unstructured data.
Okay.
Right? For instance, financial institutions.
Oh,
right?
really?
Yeah, customer support. Right? So when there are check images or even conversations with customer support, everything is being tracked. Everything is being recorded. And that needs to be stored somehow. And how would you normally store it? If it's an audio file, you would store it in an audio format.
Yeah. So what other industries are creating lots of unstructured data? Or is what you're saying, every industry is now creating lots of
Every
unstructured
single
data?
industry is creating it. I mean, you can go to manufacturing, right?
Yeah.
So when things are going down the production line, they're capturing images, they're capturing data in terms of who is handling it. So they can go back and trace certain things
right.
or where things are falling through the cracks in a manufacturing line.
I'm guessing, I don't know, 10, 15, 20 years ago, we didn't have the capabilities to be able to do that. The storage, I mean, 15 years ago, you wouldn't have had the space to store videos or images at any great scale.
So last year alone, 3.5 exabytes of data was stored
Gosh.
per day.
Wowzers.
Per day. That's a lot of lot of capacity, and most of it is stored in its natural form, and that's unstructured data.
Okay, so how should organizations be storing this data? What's the solution?
So you need performance, right? You're storing all this information, all this data. And in order to do anything with the data, you need information about the data.
Yeah.
So being able to create context or intelligence about the data is going to be critical. And that means performance of a storage solution is going to be very, very important. And as I said, the amount of storage or capacity that you need is important as well. So you need capacity scale, performance scale, and then as the data grows, you want simplicity of operations.
Yeah.
Because there aren't enough people to manage these systems.
Yeah. Okay.
So we are trying to simplify that by providing easy to use workflows to minimize the infrastructure management.
Yes, and it's that workflow, I guess, is the critical thing, because I think possibly how many organizations are doing it is that they're just dumping this data somewhere without making sense of it. But what you're saying is actually there's a workflow where you say, yes, we will store the data, but once we store the data, we want to actually then process that information and make sense of it, and then store that processed information somewhere else. So then when you want to reference that data, you can easily pull it up.
Correct.
Yeah, I mean, audio, we generate lots of audio files.
Yeah.
And if we just had a folder full of all the audio files, okay, you probably get some information about when you recorded it.
Yeah.
And how long it was for, but you wouldn't know who you were interviewing necessarily, or what the content of that was.
Yeah, I mean, if you look how you're going to save this audio file, you won't say 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9.
Yeah.
Right? You would say Gokul at Discover and the date and time, so that you provide the context as a file name. So instead of doing that, how do you create context without creating an entire long file name?
Yeah.
And that is where metadata comes in, and that's why object storage is an important element. But in many cases, customers are hoarding data as opposed to advancing data or activating their data for intelligent applications or AI or analytics.
Yeah, then it's just sitting there doing nothing.
Doing nothing, right? They're just hoarding data, and a data lake becomes a data swamp at that point. It's a bog, it's mired, there's no context. And in order to activate, in order to take advantage of that data, now either you got to move it to a different solution or ignore what the data you have, and which means you're just not doing anything with it.
You know, organizations have lots of that structured data, don't they? But what you're saying is that if we can make sense of the unstructured data, actually we can augment that into making better business decisions.
Absolutely, right? If you want to store it as natural form, unstructured data storage is the right way to go. If you look at what we've done in the past or the last 10, 15 years, it was all about big data.
Yeah.
And we had to do this extract, transform, load from natural form to a database form to create context. But now we are moving from batch processing to real-time processing. And that's the main difference between analytics and AI.
Yeah, okay. AI can do it real time.
Exactly.
All right. Thanks, Michael. What an awesome interview. And we'll be back with more in a moment, so don't go anywhere. Okay, now it's time for Today I Learned, the part of the show where we take a look at something happening in the world we think you should know about.
Yep, and it's one from me this week, Aubrey, and potentially a bit of a celebration. Norway is on track to become the first nation to eliminate the sale of internal combustion-powered private vehicles this year. So back in 2017, the country set a goal of eliminating gasoline and diesel vehicle sales by 2025. As of last year, 89% of cars sold in the country were electric, making Norway pretty well on track to achieve the goal this year, or in 2026 at a push. To give you some comparison, 20% of vehicles sold in the UK and just 8% in the US were EVs. Norway is crediting the milestone on both long-term political planning with buy-in across parties and on supplying an advanced charging network. Norway has 5 times more chargers than the UK per 100,000 people. That means that despite its often chilly climate making them less efficient, there's plenty of places to recharge. So less a breakthrough and more the end of a long-term policy, but pretty awesome nonetheless.
Pretty awesome indeed. Thanks for that, Michael.
Right, now it is time to return to my interview with Gokul Sathiacama, VP of Data Storage for AI at Hewlett Packard Enterprise, to talk about unstructured data. So have you seen any examples where customers have used a large language model or a similar model with a data set with unstructured data, and they've been able to make use of that in a good way?
In natural form, text form, a lot of companies are doing that, right? To take audio, put it into a text form, so that they can take that and then interpret what the dialogue was between two people.
Yeah. Okay.
Whether it's a customer support environment in a banking or retail, or whether it's a complaint environment in a retail. So there's so many different applications that you have for generative AI, if you will, to figure out what the conversation was or what the transaction log was, and figure out how to optimize or automate some of these processes that customers do repeatedly.
Presumably there's an additional privacy thing here with unstructured data because, some unstructured data can be quite personal, can't it? It's one thing having a photo or an audio file or a video, but actually once you've added context, that file takes on a life of its own to some extent.
Correct.
Like, you're extracting more information out of that than the original image. So I guess that from that angle, there's additional safeguards you probably have to put around that data.
Correct. And it depends on what data you're using, who is going to use that data, and what purpose.
Yeah.
What's the purpose of that data?
Yeah.
Privacy is an interesting question because it's not only about safeguarding information that you store, but think about it as from a privacy within a country, within a region, as opposed to growing global. In some cases, you want to extract that information so you can do comparisons between different data sets in the world. Mm-hmm. And customers use masking technology of the data, so not all the information is given to a broader set of customers that may want to augment their analysis. So that's how they're avoiding or taking care of that privacy by masking most of the personal information.
Yeah.
Right?
All right, so Gokul, final question. We ask all of our guests. Why should organizations care about the possibilities of unstructured data?
You're using data, you're storing data for something that may not materialize. But if you really want to take advantage of the data you're storing and getting that context to do analysis, to improve your organization, to add value and intelligence to the processes, the business practices you do, this is where unstructured data can help you.
Amazing.
And I tell all my customers, do not store data for the sake of storing data. And at some point, you may use it.
Yeah.
Only store the data you need, accelerate the data. Time to value, time to intelligence is important, and make the right choices.
Yeah, okay. Gokul, thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks so much, Michael, for bringing us that. It's been fascinating. And you can find more on the topics discussed in today's episode in the show notes.
Right. Well, we are getting towards the end of the show, which means it is time for This Week in History, a look at monumental events in the world of business and technology, which has changed our lives. Aubrey, what was last week's clue?
Well, the clue last week was it's 1941, and this drug was a real cleanser. And I actually think you got this right, Michael. You guessed it last time.
Well, my guess was something to do with penicillin. But what was the answer?
You're right. It was the first human trial of penicillin. British scientist Alexander Fleming is widely credited with discovering penicillin in 1928, but he never experimented with purifying or testing it as a drug in animals or humans. And that role was taken on by a team led by Howard Florey, who began by experimenting in mice in May of 1940. By February 1941, the drug was ready for human trials. Now, the first subject was Albert Alexander, a 43-year-old policeman, and it's widely believed that he scratched his face in a rose bush, which then became horribly infected, though it's now claimed he may have been injured in an air raid. Either way, he had just days to live, and Florey's team gave him a dose of penicillin every 4 days. He made a miraculous recovery. Unfortunately, though, the drug ran out and the infection returned, but it was a massive step in antibiotic research and spurred the mass production of the drug.
That's incredible. Now, the clue for next week is it's 1977, and this flight boldly went, but it was not alone. Ooh, cryptic. Any ideas?
I don't know. This one could be tricky.
Okay, well, that brings us to the end of Technology Now for this week. And a huge thank you to our guest, Gokul Sathiacama, VP of Data Storage for AI at Hewlett Packard Enterprise. And of course to you, thank you so much for joining us.
Technology Now is hosted by Michael Bird and myself, Aubrey Lovell. This episode was produced by Sam Dada-Paulin with production support from Harry Morton, Zoe Anderson, Lincoln Vander Westhuizen, Allison Paisley, and Alyssa Mitri. Our social editorial team is Rebecca Wissinger, Judy Ann Goldman, Katie Guarino, and our social media designers are Alejandra Garcia and Ambar Maldonado.
Technology Now is a Lower Street production for Hewlett Packard Enterprise, and we'll see you the same time, the same place next week. Cheers.